While ethics may be dependent on moral subjectivity, it is crucial for all turnaround practitioners to understand the intersection of ethics and business. In this episode, we will delve into the complexities of ethical decision-making in the turnaround practice, exploring the delicate balance between upholding ethical standards and navigating the often harsh realities of business rescue. Your host for the session is Pattinson, a professional turnaround practitioner with a success rate of more than 95% for all business rescue plans published to date. Pat specializes in the compliant and ethical rehabilitation of distressed businesses towards an outcome of saving businesses, saving jobs, and providing the best possible outcome to all affected persons.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session this morning on ethics in turnaround management and business rescue. It is often a boring topic, but we're going to try and do this one as quickly and as entertaining as possible. When we consider ethics in business rescue or ethics in general, it's obviously a rigid process and often assume that there's a specific set of rules and guidelines that we must navigate between. However, if we go to the core of ethics and we go all the way back to our morals, the morals are those habits, those way of thinking, the mannerisms, and what we accept to be correct and wrong. Those are our morals, and those morals are more often than not subjective. What is morally acceptable to myself is not necessarily morally acceptable to another person. There are many examples of this, but to try not to step on some toes, I will look at something way back in history. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right. It is the droit du seigneur, which translates roughly to the right of first night. This comes in medieval times when a lord of a certain stature were not just permitted, but it was part of the culture, and it was not just accepted, but considered a privilege when the lord were to spend the first night after a wedding with the bride. That means that it is not the husband that spends the first night with the bride, but the lord. And in today's time, that would be considered not just unethical, it could be illegal, it could be immoral. Such a promiscuous nature would definitely not be accepted in modern day times today. However, if we go further back in history, and I've recently read the book Debt, the First 5,000 Years, there are stories in cultures going further back where the father would borrow money for the wedding from a lord or a king. And the daughter would then again spend the first night with whomever borrowed that money, but she would then enter a life of slavery or prostitution for periods, sometimes up to 2 years, depending on how extravagant the wedding was, how much money was borrowed. And she would have to serve as a prostitute until that debt was repaid. And again, this was not just ethically acceptable, morally acceptable in those cultures. It was considered a privilege if your king, your lord, was prepared to borrow you the money in order for you to have this wedding and then pay it back. So morals are definitely subjective. There are arguments for your nature versus nurture. Is it the way that you were born? Is it the way that you were raised? Again, arguments that we are not really going to entertain this morning. However, at the same time, although morals are subjective, the way we act are subjective, we cannot push the boundaries or the boundaries of what we consider morally acceptable without any limitations. Again, there's a term, reductio ad absurdum, which loosely translates to reduce to the absurd. And that is when a moral argument is so far out of bounds that it can be considered nothing other than completely and utterly absurd. Again, there are many examples of this, but instead of taking something that's available in modern times, I'm going to allow myself a little protection by going back to one of the oldest ethical decisions making still used in modern day law, and that is the Queen versus Dudley and Stephens. This was in 1884 when the ship left the harbor on its way to wherever it was going. The ship sunk, and 4 of the sailors were entered into a lifeboat where they spent a long amount of time. Long story short, when they were rescued, there were only 3 sailors alive in fairly decent health. And the sailors who rescued them noticed a substantial amount of blood in the boat, but there was no real injuries. It was later found that the 3 surviving sailors killed one of the weaker sailors, the 4th person, and they consumed his body in order to stay alive. And then obviously close, when they saw the rescues, this was put overboard. And eventually they were found guilty of murder in a court of law. They were sentenced. However, when the ethical question was raised, arguments made such as self-defense, we needed to do whatever we could to survive. Based on the ethics of the matter and some really decent arguments, I would presume, their sentences was reduced to time served, and they were let go purely on ethical and moral basis. In today's life, of course, ethics do not trump the law, so we are not considering that if something is ethical that you are allowed to do it and ignore the laws. But at some point, reductum ad absurdum comes into place. It's not acceptable morally just because it is your personal moral beliefs. As we said, it is subjective. Now, when we shape these beliefs and these morals, we sometimes come from a situation where your beliefs and your morals differ substantially, as we've used the example of the right of the first night. That would not be accepted today. But how are all of these applicable to turnaround management? How can we put these into turnaround management's perspective and making sure that the turnaround managers and the business rescue practitioners act ethically, legally, and morally? So we need to look at what is available to us. And I have spent quite a bit of time looking at ethics and morals and these kind of things. And I have to give some credit to my wife. She is a nurse. In the medical profession, they've got 4 key ethical cornerstones, 4 principles of ethics that actually fits in perfectly with what a business rescue practitioner or turnaround practitioner's duties would be. Obviously similar, a nurse or a doctor are tasked with saving a person, a natural person. A business rescue practitioner or turnaround manager is tasked with saving a juristic entity, which could be considered a body. It's got purpose, it's got lifeblood. We all always hear people say that the financials or the money is the lifeblood of a business. So medical ethics, turnaround ethics are very closely aligned. And for them, we have autonomy, do not harm, do good, and justice. Let's break this up quickly and have a look at how they fall in line with medical versus turnaround management. The first one we look at is, of course, autonomy. In a medical instance, it's very, very simple. The patient does have a right to make certain decisions. We know that certain religions prevent the transfer of blood, organs, etc. So irrespective of the medical need, irrespective of how it is necessary to save a person's life, if that person refuses that treatment, it's his right. And the doctors can go to court, they can do a lot of things, but in most cases, the medical profession respects the choices of the patient. Turnaround, a little bit different. We have the business, and we would naturally assume that the directors or the shareholders of the business, in this case, which could be considered the patient, and the practitioner would then have to consider their options, their views, their instructions. That's not the case. If we look at Section 7K of the Companies Act, it's quite clear. A business rescue practitioner have got the juxtaposed duty to look at all of the affected persons. However, some preference must be given to the creditors because, again, the duty of a practitioner is to prepare a business rescue plan, just like a doctor would present a treatment for the patient. In this instance, it's the creditors that vote on that proposed business rescue plan. So it's the creditors that ultimately make the decision whether or not to follow the advice that the business rescue practitioner would provide. So yes, we need to respect their choices, but ultimately the creditors are the ones that make the decisions. A little different to when a person goes to see a doctor. Non-malevolence, do not harm. If we look at medical ethics, one of the very first phrases that you would note, and that is continuously in there, is to first do no harm. You have to weigh up the risk of what you are going to do. For example, doctor is not going to at random, amputate a limb because you've stubbed your toe. If there are other options available, he would look at those first. Once those options are considered, explored, and considered not to be applicable, he will go and make the very difficult decision to amputate that limb, remove an organ, whatever the case may be. Turnaround management, again, not to those extremes, but very similar. A turnaround practitioner or a business rescue practitioner have to consider all of the options available to him before he starts making those extreme decisions. And examples of those extreme decisions are retrenchments. And these are normally things that we hear of. But trust me, ladies and gentlemen, I have done many retrenchments as a necessity. It is never my first option. Everything else is considered. But because retrenchments is so harsh, because of the extreme nature of having to tell people they no longer have an income, that is why it is known why it's out there. It's not because it's the first choice, but it's because of the severity of that choice. Another option, of course, of cost saving. You cannot cost save your way into rehabilitation. In fact, it could have the opposite effect. Your cost saving could impede the business in such a manner that's impossible to continue trading, selling assets, selling stock, retrenching staff. Eventually, the business can simply no longer perform. And although it might have been a short-term solution for the turnaround practitioner, it has done irreparable harm going into the future. So yes, difficult decisions need to be made, but they cannot be made at a whim. They need to be made with thought. Beneficence, of course, is very similar, but the exact opposite. It's to do good. Whatever you do in the business rescue process, the key goal must be to do good. It is not a question of just saving the business. You must save the business, but thinking what is going to happen into the future. In medical practice, yes, you might need to amputate a specific limb, but then the doctor needs to look at what can he do to assist the process, what guidance can he give, what consultation can he give, counseling. It is not just a question about the quick fix, the here and now. You have to consider the long-term impact that your decisions will have right now. And the aim must always be to do good, not for one specific entity or one specific group in a business rescue context. Again, Section 7K, you need to consider doing good for everybody. The absence of doing good is, of course, as they say, the road to all evil. We need to consider justice, fair distribution. Medical ethics is very similar. If we look at a war type scenario, there are men coming from the battlefield. They need to be triaged, they need to be put in order, and fair treatment needs to be given to everybody, and everybody has to have an opportunity to be rescued. In our laws around the medical profession, there is a slight disconnect, and it's an ethical conundrum that will always be battled, and I don't think there's a quick fixed answer. But in some instances, we know that people have perished. They've literally died because they did not have medical aid. They were pointed away, go to a different hospital. You don't have a medical aid, go to a free hospital, clinic, provincial hospital, and that delay has caused irreparable harm. However, in the medical profession, it's quite clear that irrespective of medical aid, irrespective of the hospital, if the condition is obviously life-threatening, that hospital, that doctor is obliged to assist the patient, get them stable before they would then possibly be moved to a different institution. But that is the disconnect. And through medical aid, some people will have better options than with those without medical aid will have. When we look at business rescue, when we look at turnaround management, there must be a fair distribution. And similar to a wartime situation or an accident, sometimes you need to triage those key role players in a business rescue. As the Companies Act refers to them as affected persons or creditors. It would be great if we could treat all the creditors the same. But firstly, there are law that prevents that, similar to the medical aid. Secured creditors have to be ranked differently based on their security. very little we can do about that. The Companies Act is clear. We then have your concurrent creditors. And this is where triage situation is created, because in certain turnaround practices, certain business rescues, those creditors that are key to the survival and the long-term sustainability of the business, in some instances might need a certain degree of preference. If we need their resources, we might need to pay them a little bit more, pay them a little bit faster, just keep buying from them at a different rate. And that is why in business rescue, you are also permitted to create classes of creditors. So you might have a group of concurrent creditors, but you might need to split that group into different categories of creditors to triage the situation to allow for the best long-term result for all of the affected persons. So it's not a question of preferencing that person and he will only benefit. Preferring that category of creditors long-term should then also benefit all of the affected persons. Concept called sliding doors. The decisions we make, the preference we provide the creditors, the preference we do not provide the creditors, how will that impact the business 5 years down the line? The selling of assets, the retrenchment of staff, the selling of a business, how does that impact the greater body of creditors or the affected persons 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line? So what the sliding doors provide, the concept is we decide on a specific action that's going to be taken. We are going to retrench half of the workforce. How is that going to impact the business over the next couple of years? We obviously have to consider the cost of retrenchment packages, but let's put that aside. Let's look at the intellectual property. How difficult will it be to re-employ and secure the staff to do the jobs of those that we have retrenched in the next 5 years when the company is rehabilitated and they need the staff again? How long will it take to train them? What will the cost of employing them be if we need to use recruitment agents, etc., etc.? What is the impact of that? And those staff that we are retrenching, what risk do they give to the business with the intellectual property that they can now take to opposition? It's not an easy thing to do, but we need to remember that in a business rescue scenario, practitioners will make mistakes. It's only natural. It is a very fast-paced thing. We do not have the luxury of time. You need to consider the options. The information you are provided more often than not are not necessarily a true reflection. And again, the information changes the longer the process goes on. We've mentioned previously the reductum ad absurdum. If in some instance we have a business rescue plan that will work in the first 25 days of a business rescue process, it would be reduced to the absurd to consider that that business rescue plan without any changes will still work if it's only implemented 6 months down the line. It's simply not practical to think of that way. However, we as practitioners are judged 6 months down the line for what we did in the past. So we need to look at what we have done. We need to consider the information at hand, and we need to make sure that how we reflect and how we make those decisions can actively prove that we did it in the best interest of the business based on the information that we had at hand at that point in time. A simple example, if we can go to Greek mythology and we look at Medusa. Medusa is always seen as this villain that changed men into stone by simply looking at them. But Medusa wasn't always that way. She actually was a maiden that served in one of the temples. She was then sexually assaulted by Poseidon, and as a punishment, the lady in charge of the temple then turned her into a gorgodon, which is someone that turns other people into stone. But she was the victim that was ultimately punished for doing nothing wrong. And then we all know her life came to an end when the Greek hero Theseus came around, chopped off her head, and he killed the Kraken. Again, probably turning her into a hero. But if we know the history and we know exactly how it came to be, if Theseus came and he went to Medusa and said, "We need your help to defeat this Kraken," there is a likelihood that she might have agreed. But history is always written by the victor and not necessarily based on the ethical decision-making that happened in the past. So in short, make sure that you can back up and that you have thought through and that you've considered all of the avenues before a decision is made in a business rescue scenario. Ethical decision making, as we said, balances the risk. You cannot make an ethical decision and completely ignore the laws and legalities around it. The Companies Act is clear of process that needs to be taken. There is long-term risk involved, and you need to make sure that you make the right decisions, that you open the right door, and that even if you step through a different door or a wrong door, that the outcome can be justified. And remember the 4 key concepts of medical ethics: autonomy, non-malevolence, beneficence, and justice, and have that guide you throughout your decision making, throughout your turnaround management process. You need to protect the business. The business is the body. The business is what puts food on the table for all of the employees. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this session. Again, I'd like to thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm David Masterton, Director of BR360. BR360 is a company that specializes in business rescue. That is why we wanted to team up with Pat and sponsor these episodes. These episodes provide insights not often spoken about. We look forward to future episodes and engaging with you, the viewer. Hope you enjoy Pat's insights and find it useful. Please feel free to contact us.
The views expressed in these episodes are solely those of the presenters and are based on their personal experiences. They do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of any professional associations or organizations with which the presenters may be affiliated. The content of these episodes is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, accounting, or any other professional advice. Viewers are encouraged to seek advice from qualified professionals regarding their specific circumstances.
Thank you for watching with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to like, subscribe, and follow us for more. Thank you.